I'll start off very quickly with one of my favorite little parables or little short stories that comes from the Hasidic tradition, since I opened up with that. Some of you remember it. A lot of you won't have heard this one or won't remember it, so that's good. I can tell it again. But the Rabbi Baal Shem Tov, who I already mentioned as the founder of the famous Hasidic faith, the most this potent form of mystical tradition that's in the Jewish tradition. The founder of that was said to be dying, and he was on his deathbed, and his disciples had gathered around him, and they were gathered around him in order of importance, the way that we like to do in institutional religion. You know, we put people in order of their insight, their understanding, their discipleship, as you know, their veterancy, whatever. But so they were lined up around him, and then they were lined down the hallway, and then disciples went out the door, and then less and less of the followers and more of those who were curious about the Rebbe, and then down the street about maybe a block or so. So there was a gathering of people around him to be present as he was to pass into the next life. And so as he lay there gasping, just barely there, clinging to air, one of the rabbis, the one at the front, the most learned of them, leaned over and said, "Rebbe," which is a title of honor, "Rebbe, tell us, what is the meaning of life?" And the Rebbe looks up, and just with his eyes hardly open, he says, "Life is like a river." And then he closes his eyes. And for just a moment, the lead disciple pondered this, and then he passed it on to the next disciple. The Rebbe says that life is like a river. We could say life is like a puzzle, perhaps, for example. But he says life is like a river. And then it goes around the bed a couple of times to follow the disciples. Then it goes out the door, then down the hallway. But progressively, as it goes down, you played the telephone game. You remember that game, how it happens. And you know how people take certain things that they hear and it becomes something else entirely. You'll hear maybe one thing that I say all morning, and then you'll make up 20 other things that I never said. I mean, that's how it goes, right? And so down the street, until finally at the end, it didn't really make much sense. And the last person in the line said, "What? That makes no sense. What does he mean life is a river? Tell the Rebbe we don't understand." So the question came on back down. Now it came back down the street, back up to the steps, back into the house, and around the bed, the question, till it got to the disciple at the front, and he leaned over to the Rebbe, who was amazingly still alive, and he says, "Rebbe, I'm sorry." And he kind of punched him a couple of times to wake him up, and the Rebbe said, "What do you want?" He was just barely grasping his last breath of life, and the disciple said, "We don't understand. What do you mean life is like a river?" And the Rebbe, with his last breath, looked up and said, "So maybe it's not." So I love this because it reminds us, this whole idea of the parable of the prodigal son, how much the Pharisees in that story put into their tradition, into their leadership role in the temple, into Judaism, into the structure and its institutionalism, and how little they were present to what was really happening in the world around them. And so Jesus, what did Jesus do? He spent most of his time being present to the world around them, and being connective in the way that God is love, and connecting with others in compassionate ways. And so those in charge would question it. What's this all about? And then he tells the story of the prodigal son. But as we said, it's not the story. The story's not about the individual salvation of one of us or all of us returning home after realizing how much we've sinned or the relationship we've broken with God, and so we return back and God is always there waiting. It's really about the elder son who didn't get it from the first place. The Pharisees, the leadership, the people that have been around, the people that have been there always saying, "God, I got your back," but not present to everybody around them. It's really about that. It's really that we live and we move and we have our being interconnected with everyone else and all of life in this love that we call God. We live and move and have our being in God. So the challenge is then, how do we fit that all together? How do we piece that together in a way that is practical for us? So I got a couple of quick thoughts. And I'm calling it 4 life lessons from the jigsaw puzzle. Because I'm thinking basically about how we live our lives and this parable of the prodigal son as kind of a puzzle. The puzzling nature of life that we find ourselves in. I don't know how many of you like to play with puzzles. I'm fine with the 25-piece ones. The 2,000-piece ones overwhelm me. But I want to share something that someone said to me once. And this was interesting because she said this to me years ago when I was at at the Bible church as an adolescent. Her name was Joyce. And I'll never forget, Joyce came up to me and she said, Tom, you don't avoid unhappiness. She knew something about my background, about the family, the situation I grew up with. And then I was like a lot of teenagers, getting myself into trouble and being in the wrong place at the wrong time and all those kinds of things. And she said, Tom, you don't avoid unhappiness by pursuing happiness. You don't find happiness by trying to avoid unhappiness. She said, you don't do that. She said, happiness has no, and this was what I kind of had to get my head around. I think I knew what she meant back then, but I think she didn't know what she meant today, if I could say that. She said, happiness has no cause but freedom. Happiness is about freedom. And then she added to that, of course, because we were in the Bible church, freedom from sin. Freedom from the devil, freedom from Satan. I mean, she added things that you would expect in that context. And in that context, I heard it as something very strange and very removed from me. The devil made me do it, but I need to turn to God. I need to be free of my sin, that kind of thing. Years and years and years and years and years later, here I am. And I think she was right. Because what is sin but separation, disconnection? Or as Elizabeth was saying earlier, the opposite of what she was saying, the failure to recognize that we are grounded in love and everyone else is too. We are all grounded in this same creative order. You want to call love the creative order, the animating force in life. You want to call love God who intervenes in different ways. But we are all grounded in this reality. And it's a reality we share. All you got to do is watch what happens when some of us don't do certain things and it affects other people on the other side of the country or on the other side of the world or in our environment. We are all interconnected and grounded in this reality, this creative love. And so I'm thinking, well, she wasn't all that far from correct. You know, Rumi, the mystic poet, he put it this way. He said, your task is not to seek for love, but to seek and find all the barriers within ourselves that we raise up against it, right? That's that hard thing. And what happens is that when we do this, we find that we have this freedom to begin to pay attention to those that love us. And those whose love, this is interesting, those whose love we are yet to experience. How often do you wake up in the morning and go, I wonder who's going to love me today? I don't. I should do it more often. But it gives us this freedom when we recognize that that's where we are, that we are putting up these barriers to our very selves, and we are preventing ourselves from coming home to ourselves, from coming home to the same reality that we all join and participate in. It gives us the freedom to find the beauty in our moments. It gives us the freedom to let go of our need to prove anything, to respond to the need for love and justice in others. It gives us the freedom to exist at the very heart of God's love and that love in ourselves. I think the quote, if you put that quote up here, do we have that quote? Joy is the emotional expression of the courageous yes to one's own true being. There it is, Paul Tillich. Joy is the emotional expression of the courageous yes to one's own true being, and that's the hardest thing. I read it recently that the simplest thing that we have to do, that we have to learn how to do in order to experience life in its depths and its beauty is one thing. We simply have to pay attention to what we're experiencing. If I go through I'm going to go through these 4 little lessons. If you remember anything, pay attention to what you're experiencing. That's perhaps the most profound thing and the most difficult thing to do, right? Because the moment I do it, I'm thinking it's me paying attention to what I'm experiencing, and already I'm looking and focusing on me. And I don't exist. I'm just a thing. You're just a thing. The pain we're experiencing is just a thing. The suffering we experience is just a thing. It's not saying it's not real. What I'm saying is, how much do we always attach to it, right? How much of life and meaning and judgment and do we attach to it? We can't respond to where we are until we can begin to pay attention to where we are and what we're experiencing. And that's challenging. That's more difficult. That's why we do the whole Kairos thing. is to begin to learn how to let go enough of what we're preoccupied with to be here present to the moment. So lesson 1. I think we're going to pull it up. Lesson 1. The truth of the matter, life's a jumble of moments. You get the puzzle, you see it's got 2,000 pieces, you get enough courage to open it up, you turn it upside down, and then what do? Run like hell. You dig into it, you get overwhelmed. Life's a jumble of pieces. But the first lesson past that is then to pay attention. Because when I begin to let myself get out of the way, when I begin to learn how to fall, then the one that I start to recognize that catches me is me. Is the God in me, is the love, the sacred love in me, is the sacred acceptance that I am in fact loved, that I don't have to do anything. Pay attention to where we are and how we're thinking about things. What will we learn from that? You know, I told this story once about the mom and the young son, and she was a teacher, a professor at school, and she was always being bothered by her 5-year-old son. He was always asking questions. He always wanted to do stuff. She was in the middle, this particular day, of grading papers that had to be done by the next morning, and she was just overwhelmed. She kept trying to put him off, until finally she had this great idea. She was in a magazine, saw this magazine article to the side of her. She saw this picture of the globe, the earth. And so she tore it out. She said, I got a perfect thing for you to do. I know just what to do. He was excited, a task, a game, something to do. She said, and she cut it up into pieces. She cut the earth up into pieces. Then she kind of stacked them all on top of each other, put them in a little box, and then gave them to the boy, and said, I want you to take this over there to the other side of the room, and you put this back together, and when you get it back together, come back and tell me. She thought, well, this is going to take him for a while. This will take a while. Let's keep him busy. So she gave the pieces to him. He went off the corner. She started getting back together, working on what she was working on. And as she was doing this, maybe 10 minutes passed. He came back over and he says, Mom, what's the next thing? She said, what? You did this? And she looked down. She saw the puzzle was all stuck together with Scotch tape. The earth looked perfect. She said, how did you do this? You're a genius. He said, I know. He said, but I didn't put the earth together. I got lucky. And then he turned it over, and there was a picture of a guy standing there in a blank sort of space, but he was very clearly, arms, legs, his body. She looked at him, she said, what did you do? And he said, all I had to do was put the person together, and that would put the planet together. That's our challenge, right? We take it one piece at a time. That's lesson number 2. But if we're really paying attention, we recognize that the pieces are actually looking for connection. All the pieces are. So it's less a matter of us forcing something to be together and more a matter of us paying attention to where we fit and how we fit in each moment. That's the opposite of what the Pharisees did, right? The Pharisees came in and said, this is how it's supposed to look. This is the way it's supposed to fit together, and you're doing it wrong. Because Jesus loved to come in, turn boxes of puzzles upside down. Break the whole thing up, start over. But what we realize is that it's not about how we think things are supposed to be. It's more of how we come to understand ourselves in these moments. How is God, how is love inviting us to participate in these moments in a way that puts things together? The parable is all about restoration and redemption. It's all about recognizing the love and everyone's included. It's all about the invitational nature of the kingdom of God. How do we do that? Piece by piece, but we need to recognize also that the pieces are out there seeking connection as well. I was doing a puzzle once over across the street from us up in Michigan where we have this little place and there's an inn across the street. And so in the main lobby area, they always have a big table. There's always a puzzle out there. And what's always fun to watch is how these puzzles they start coming together because you don't see anybody. People just put pieces in there every now and then. Sometimes you'll see someone sitting down for an extended period of time, but nobody spends more than about 10 minutes or so. And little by little, it comes together. We never see the other folks around us that are bringing these things together for us. I asked one guy once that I saw putting it together, and I said, how do you do this? Because I'm always intimidated. I'm always looking for what fits in this space over here. You know, here's the picture partially done. What fits there next? And he says, oh, I don't ever do that. He says, I always go through and I look for a piece that sort of looks interesting to me, and then I see if there's a place that it fits. And if there's not, I just put it in the middle, and I look for another piece that speaks to me, and I see if it's a place that fits. Now, what an interesting way to go about it. Kind of the reverse. I'm going to share with you a story that I hesitated to share with you for a number of reasons, but I'll kind of finish with this last point, the last 2 points, and tell you this story. When I was in seminary, when Linda and I were in seminary, we had a class that was called The Social Context of Ministry. Now that sounds like an interesting academic class. The point of the class was to go to different social contexts and think about what ministry would be in those contexts. You go to a bus station, what does ministry look like in the bus station? You go to a courthouse, what does ministry look like in the courthouse? We were supposed to do 2 of these every week and then write up a quick report on it. Well, it was late one night and I had a report due the next day, and I didn't know what to do, and so a friend of mine and I decided, well, what's open at midnight? So we went to a strip club. Now, see, I was hesitant to tell you this. I mean, the idea that you could go do ministry in a strip club, how many guys would be hitting the strip club then, I guess? You know, when I got there, I mean, I was so intimidated and kind of concerned and anxious, and my friend was kind of laughing, he was feeling the same way. And we walked in and we sat down kind of at the back area, sort of a little bit more removed from the stage, and I tried to basically kind of keep my eyes looking at the crowd. I tried to look more at the crowd, and so this girl comes up to me, this young woman who was probably a few years older. I was 23 at the time. She comes up to me and she says, hi. And of course I look right at her face. And so I said, hi. And she said, so who are you? And I said, well, I'm Tom. Now, imagine if I'd said I'm a minister. I said, I'm Tom. And I said, what's your name? And she said, Vixen. And my friend was laughing, and I kind of thought, well, yeah, but is that your real name? You know, because obviously it's not a real name. And she kind of smiled. She said, no, my real name is Debbie. And I said, oh, well, hi, Debbie, I'm Tom, and this is Jim, and that's not his real name either. But I didn't know what to do. I mean, it was like, what does ministry mean in this setting, right? What does ministry mean in this setting? You know, you go to a courthouse, you're looking for justice, you're looking that people get a fair trial, you're looking for equality, equity, you're looking for those kinds of issues. Is that happening? Restoration rather than punitive kinds of practices? What do you do in a strip club? Do you try to tell them, you know, your life could be better, God loves you, and you need to repent from this kind of thing? I wasn't really sure, so I just said, how long have you been doing this? And she said, well, a couple of years. I've got a little girl at home. She said, I make good tips and good money doing this. And I said, is it easy to do this? I mean, I was trying to figure out what kind of questions, like what kind of skills do you have to develop in order to do this kind of thing? And she smiled and she said, you know, this is hard to do this kind of thing. She said, but I guess I'm good at it because I get a lot of tips and the money's really good. And she said, but I got to tell you, I don't always feel good about it. And I said, really? I wondered if it was hard for you. She said, yeah, it's nice to have attention, but it's awkward. And then I start feeling ashamed. And then I thought, if my parents ever really knew what I was doing, how would that go over? And she said, it's pretty complicated. I feel pretty bad at times in the midst of feeling good about things. I don't know that I'll be doing this for a long time. And I said, well, how do you deal with it? And then she looked at me and she said, 3 minutes at a time. I said, wow, yeah. And then she said, I'm about to go up in just a minute. And I said, well, it was great to talk to you, Vixen. And she said, no. She said, Debbie. I said, it's good to talk to you, Debbie. And so I watched Debbie turn and start back towards the stage. And then I saw Vixen get up on the stage. And as I left and I started to write down my report that night, I realized how much more I had learned than maybe she had. But I also realized that I might have been a little bit different customer than she'd been around before. Part of the power in recognizing who we are at our home plate, who we are at our core, who we are authentically to God, is recognizing when other people see us, right? When other people hear our story. How can we approach others with that attentiveness that says, you matter as well? May have been the only time that's happened. Maybe she'll get lucky and happen again. I realized something as I was writing the report. I can't believe it took me almost the whole semester to figure this out. This is what Jesus did. This is just what Jesus did. Jesus just walked around and connected with people. And when people refused to connect, he told them stories. And he told them stories about prodigal sons or Samaritans who save the people that they shouldn't be even paying attention to. So lesson 3 is lean into others and the unexpected help of strangers. And then finally, lesson 4. Well, throw up the quote here, if we can, from one of my favorite authors, Ross Gay. Do we have that quote coming up next? Yes. The rigorous practice of gratitude is one of the ways we remind ourselves that we are meant, in fact, to live. How do we find ourselves in whatever moments we find ourselves with that ability to be grateful, to find a moment of gratitude? And I think it gets back to what I was saying, learn how to pay attention to ourselves, to where we are in each moment. If we want to find out how we're fitting, we have to pay attention. And if it's an awkward fit, we have to ask ourselves why that is. What are we missing when we're not seeing that we are held in the love of God, that we are held in the ground of God's being? You call that love, you call that the creative force at the heart of things, you call that generosity. How is it that we're missing that? That's what we're invited to do every day. The prodigal son realized it. The prodigal son comes back. The elder son forgot it, never remembered it the whole time. The one thing he couldn't see was that you rest in the same love and grace that everybody else does. So here's lesson number 4 then. Lesson number 4 is catch and release. That's the hardest thing, is to see that it's just a thing. When we start to recognize where we are, who we are, it's just a thing. We don't own who we are. We don't own what we have. We think we do. Sometimes our cars become part of our character, our personality. Sometimes our spouse or the spouse we're looking for is just another aspect of what we think makes our lives more meaningful. We wear things and do things and have things. They're just things. Martin Buber said, when you can recognize yourself and the other in a deep way, there's a sacredness that's happening between you. Like the prodigal son and Jesus with the Pharisees. There's a sacredness that's already here. How do we get to that? We learn to let go. We learn to release it. I remember once as a youth minister, I did this. I don't see Jennifer here. I don't see Sherry Dewar here. Maybe you guys are watching online. They were both members of 1111. They were also youth in my youth group because I was like 12 when I did youth ministry here. So when I had them the first time, Sharon will remember this because Sharon, her kids were in the program too. I remember one of the first things I did, because I learned it when I was in the Baptist church, was I had them create something beautiful with clay. And then after they had all worked on this whole thing, I came around and I smashed them. And I told them, this is what we do with God's creation. Right? Because I didn't understand what the parable of the prodigal son was all about. Prodigal son was not about original sin and how we screw it up. We don't need anybody to tell that. We live it day to day. What we need to recognize is that God's inviting us to make beauty out of all these moments. But instead of God coming along and smashing it, we're the ones that need to learn to just let it go. When I was telling stories with the Tibetan Buddhists when they came to Fort Worth 15 years ago, 10 years ago, they were doing mandalas. You remember the sand mandalas? They were doing it at the Modern Art Museum, I think, or the Kimball. Big 5-foot, 10-foot ones, beautiful designs they worked on all week. You know what they do at the end of it? At the end of it, they all move in and they just scatter the whole thing. They just spread it out. Because what they've recognized is you live your life moment to moment. How do we deal with this puzzle of life? 3 minutes at a time. How do we deal with this puzzle of life? Paying attention to who we are and where we are already at home with God. Now, when we get there, how do we invite others to join along? Band, you guys already back up here? Okay. So, just to recap, life's a jumble of moments, lesson 1. It's good and it's bad, but the puzzle isn't just a crapshoot. Because it doesn't matter about the puzzle, it matters more about who we are as the piece. Who we are as the piece in this puzzle of life. So we take it one moment at a time, we take it one piece at a time, we take it 3 minutes at a time, and we remember that there are always connections looking for us. Even in those moments that are Pharisaic and that other person, that other group doesn't get it. In fact, especially in those moments. Lean into others. Find, create, and hire a support system if you don't have one. If you don't have a group of friends that you can literally dump on, pay someone. Because you can't pay attention to yourself as well as we need to. I guarantee it. It's hard practice paying enough attention to let go of the judgments. It's hard. And then finally, it's just a thing. It's just a thing. I can't tell you how many times have I recommended that you all need to get the app that's called We Croak, because it will tell you 5 times a day you're going to die. Life is a jumble of pieces. It comes and it goes. It's hello, it's goodbye, it's aloha. There's always a moment in this great world of God's creation, in this great world of love at the very ground of our being. There's always a moment that's looking to make connection when we're paying attention. Amen.